Lundqvist, and you're listening to Gut Talks, WGUTT.
Cool. So, hi everyone, I'm Maria, and welcome to Gut Talks, where we co create a collective intelligence involving both people who are not always in the limelight and those who are, in order to learn from each other and spread knowledge, creative, and critical thinking in the business world. All I ask is to follow or subscribe to the show and get in touch. It helps me know that there are actually people listening, and I'm not just shouting in the void. Now, let's get started. Our guest today is Johanna Lundqvist, a nurse and researcher, an artist and jewelry designer creating works that blur the lines between nature and fantasy. She's also a speaker, to say the least, who's not afraid to explore the transitions of life, including the ones most people shy away from a Western society perspective, just clarifying this bit. Johanna is a registered nurse from Sweden. She's worked in elderly care, geropsychiatry, and specialized hospice care. She has been on the side of many individuals and their families through the most profound moments of life, dying and death. Her passion lies in human connection and easing the fears surrounding death. In this episode, she brings these topics to life, sharing her experiences and perspectives to help people understand what the dying process really looks like. Because she believes that by talking about death, we can learn to embrace life more fully. And Johanna, I'm really pleased to have you here on Gut Talks, and I hope this intro kind of set the scene, because I think it's a topic where we can, I mean, it's difficult, it's a topic that requires our attention and maybe to rewire our brain to be a bit more, creative in our approach towards it. So thank you so much. And I want to give a shout out to Adam Lawrence for introducing me to you. Yeah, and he was on the show before. So how are you?
I'm fine, thank you. This is a little bit scary, a little bit exciting.
Yeah, and it's live. I wanted this episode to be live after so long of like not recording any episodes on my end, but I think I needed to be ready also for it. So that's really raw. Um, and yeah, everything you're going to talk about is from your experience. You spent like over 10 years
Yeah, I was
working
I
in.
was 11 years about in hospice care, but I also followed people towards the end in, like you said, in geriatric care, elderly care, and other settings as well.
So let's start with this. What's the biggest misconception people have about death?
I would say that it is so terrifying. Death and dying doesn't have to be terrifying at all. It is not something people in general look forward to, obviously, but
Hmm.
I really, really believe that one doesn't have to be so scared.
What made you think that people shouldn't be so scared?
Well, I think that people, especially in Western society, has a very a view of death that is very unrealistic. Um, Most people are quite removed from death and dying. It
Hmm.
takes quite a long time in a person's life, hopefully, before they have a relative or loved one that dies. And in the Western society, we tend to die in hospitals, and the relatives sort of becomes guests sitting beside. They're not really part of the process a lot of the time. Um, and I think if you get all your information about what death is from TV and news, then it's very catastrophic most of the time, because that's what you see. And it can be huge numbers that you can't relate to at all. So it's terrifying images, but you can easily push it away from yourself. And then other ways to get to know about death and dying is movies and TV. And then it's often either horrific, like horror movie stuff, or it can
Hmm.
also be incredibly romantic death that are completely unrealistic too. Um, so it's hard for people in general, I think, or I would put it other way, it's very easy for people in general in Western society not have to care about death and dying. It's easy to push away from oneself.
You used an interesting word like not to care about death and dying. Why is that?
I think people are scared. I mean, we human beings, we want to understand and control our lives. It's something that's how we have sort of developed through the years of being human beings, and that means that we want to control, we want to understand, and we want to be able to change if it's something we don't like. Death and dying, at least death and dying is hard to control. There are many, many things that can be done to make the death and the dying easier, but can in the end not stop it. And people don't like that. People want to be able to control things.
So this episode, actually, we're gonna touch, because obviously there's so much to unpack and we can't unpack everything, but we will try to look at the experience, as you said, and what we can do. But what matters also is to look at it from the perspective of the person who's going through the last hours of their life, but also the caregivers who can also be family members, and close ones.
Mm-hmm.
And the perspective is different from all sides. So I have a quick question to ask here, though, just before we jump in completely. Do you feel that religion kicks in even more or less at this stage in these societies?
I would say that's very different from society to society.
Mhm.
Um, I come from a society where I have worked in Sweden, which is very atheist, I would say.
Mhm.
Um, and most people wouldn't say that they are particularly religious. Of course, I've met religious people too, but in general, people are not very actively religious. Um, I can say that my experience is that people who are very, very religious either get lots of comfort from their religion, or they might also get scared by their religion.
Okay,
Um, mm,
that's an interesting one. Okay, so let's move forward a bit. So, in you mentioned it, we touched on it. So, in many cultures, death is treated as a taboo topic. What's the impact of that avoidance, meaning of avoiding talking
mm,
about it?
yeah, I would say that it is mostly in Western society. I
Hmm.
s- and now this is what I believe. I don't know exactly. I don't know all cultures in the world, obviously, um, but because it's so easy to remove oneself from the death and dying experience of someone else in Western society, we can just push away and not care. Um, the consequences is, of course, that we are not prepared when someone near to us are dying, or if you yourself get a diagnosis and you're dying. Um, and it's also leaves relatives behind that might be in a situation where they don't know what you wanted if you die. You know, did you want to have what type of funeral did you want to have? Did you want to donate your organs? Um, did you have any other wishes? Was there something that you wanted to have said? I mean, people don't talk to each other in the end because this relatives thinks that the person dying don't want to talk about it, and the person dying ends up taking care of the people that come and visit and the relatives because they feel that they are scared to talk about it and they don't want their relatives to be uncomfortable. Um, so that is a big problem.
Yeah, it is. So you're saying that the person dying. Sometimes we say this, like sometimes people know. Um, I remember years ago, my that was like 20 years ago, 21. My grandfather, actually longer. It was I was maybe 16, and my grandfather was telling me he was looking for something, um, and at some point he's like, "Ah, I'm done. I want this to end." And then 2 years later,
Mhm.
he died. And
Mhm.
I don't know how to ask the question here, but is it that they know beyond the age or whatever? Like, do they know? Why do they say this? Because sometimes you're not going to hear a 22-year-old or I don't know, 41 say this.
No. Well, I think when you come to a certain age, when you grow old, there will be a time when you start feeling that you are done, just like your grandfather did.
Hmm.
It might be that you see your friends die away. Suddenly your social circles become smaller and smaller. You might feel that you have lost your purpose uh, in society. You're not working anymore and you don't feel you contribute. I mean, but I also think that when you really start moving towards dying and you think about the dying process in a few stages, and if you're in the first early stage, quite often people start to have a bit of kind of discomfort. Something is happening in their bodies and they know something is not right. I mean, sometimes people, of course, die from a diagnosis like cancer, and then they quite often fight to get healed, cured for a long time, and then a
Hmm.
point comes when we know that it can't be cured, and then they go into palliative care. Um, and at that point, they know that they are dying. They just don't know exactly how long that will be. But also people who are dying from old age, if we call it that,
Hmm.
they will start having feelings, I believe, and they feel themselves getting more tired, and they're not interested in society around them much anymore, and they become more self-focused, which is completely normal. They start thinking about their lives. They might want to talk about their lives with their relatives about things that happened long ago, not interested in learning new things maybe at all. And I think that is part of the dying process, and that can start for an old person who's dying from having a body that slowly ages and dies. That can start a year beforehand, absolutely.
Okay, no, thank you for this. I think that's important because sometimes I wanted to ask the question because you just triggered it, and some people can relate to it because after someone passes away, they can go back to a point in time and be like, oh, I remember this person saying that or
Mm.
doing this,
Mm.
Um, but sometimes you're just not aware of it
No.
until,
And and it's really, really important to realize that an old person has been around for a long time, and what they want to do and how they perceive life and what's important will be vastly different from what you as a young person will think. Most often, I could say, maybe not always, but most of the time, often. And this is, of course, makes it very hard for a young person to understand when an older person say, I don't want to go out and for a walk. I don't want to go out for coffee. I don't want to be active. Just leave me alone. I want to sit here and think about things. And the young person then will think, oh, he's so bored. He must get so bored if he sits around and does nothing all day. But in the end, the last year or so, maybe that might be the only thing they have energy to do in their thoughts, and, nap a little, eat a little, watch a little TV, or not. Yeah.
yeah, so that's, yeah, I'm just trying to think about people I know at this stage. So it's like something they want. It's not that they're, you know,
You
yeah.
know, it might be easier to talk about it also out of when I was in hospice, where people die of diseases in a different way, also young
Hmm.
people who were dying from cancer would come to a point where if hospice care was really good, yeah, which it usually is, if you're lucky, you have a good palliative care team and you get good care, and if that works the way it's supposed to do, you as a very ill person will probably come to the realization that your body can't carry you further. you know
Mm,
you realize, I can't get up to go to the bathroom myself, I can't eat properly myself. And it can also be on a more existential level, that you just know that this body is done. And if you're not scared or in pain, or have anxiety at that point, then death is not a threat anymore. It doesn't have to be a threat. And they also have a knowledge, like, yeah, it's going to happen because I know my body's done.
So that's where the body and the soul are no longer aligned, actually.
Yeah, if you
And
believe in a soul, you could explain it that way. Absolutely. I usually don't explain in spiritual terms. I try to keep very scientific, but many,
yeah.
many people believes that's the case.
So how do you explain it? I'm just visually trying to see that, we've seen this in cartoons and in movies where you have the body, but then like the shadow of the body that comes out of it and walks away.
Yeah. I don't know how to explain that. I don't think we see that. I can't say, what I can say when I see someone die, it is
Mm,
that in the moment they die, you realize they are very dead. It is not, most of the time, it's not hard to tell that a person is dead because there is a total absence of life.
mm,
What that means, if that means that a soul has left the body or whatever that is, it can just be that the life energy is gone, movement, everything, life, breathing, human beings, all life is energy. When the
mhm,
body dies and our brain stops functioning and it's gone, well, what happens with the body then is that it's supposed to break down and disappear because the body has done its job. And
mhm,
whatever happens with your mind or your soul or whatever you want to call it, we don't know that. We have no idea. I
mhm.
don't think we can know that.
No, there are there are lots of things we won't know. And how did you sleep at night
How I,
when before when you were actually working
how I
in the
sleep at
space?
night. Uh,
Yeah, when you
yeah,
first started, and then when you got between breaks, right? Got
yeah,
used to it, if
yeah.
if that's
You
something we can
know,
say.
yeah, I was never scared, and I
Hmm.
never found it uncomfortable. I find uncomfortable if people are in pain or have anxiety. That is
Hmm.
very, very uncomfortable. That is not only related to death and dying, though. That is in general setting, either as a nurse or as a human being. I have quite a lot of empathy, so
Hmm.
it is hard for me to deal when people are suffering if there's nothing I can do about it. In hospice, there's so much I can do about it. Yeah. I have so many tools and so many ways to be of service to help relieve that pain and the anxiety, for instance.
And
So
that's for the caregivers and for the dying person.
for the dying person and also for the relatives and caregivers, if they're relatives, absolutely. And
Hmm.
um, yeah, I would say. Mhm.
Can you share a tool or something, maybe a story,
Tool, a story, a
a
tool.
tool through a story?
I can share a story. I don't know if it's a tool, but I think it explains very well that people's life stories are so different, and that when you end up in a situation when you as a patient are in hospice, it doesn't mean the same for anyone. Yeah, I had
Hmm.
a lovely old man who was dying from a bad liver in his case. He had been a drug addict and alcoholic most of his life, and he was in his early 60s at this point, and most of his life he had been sleeping in the streets. He had not had much of a home ever in his life, so he had seen lots of suffering, much cold and much discomfort. He said in hospice, when we helped him and we got, because that's what you do in hospice and in palliative care, you focus on symptoms. You want to make the symptoms get better. Whatever symptoms of discomfort you have, we
Hmm.
try to get them better. And he said that those weeks he had there, while he was still talking, were the best weeks of his life because he had a warm bed, he had a TV, he had a radio, he had people who could talk to, he got fed 3 times a day or whenever he wanted. For him, this was like the best hotel, you know, and he was just happy that he got to end there.
Hmm.
Yeah. So that is a story that I think really shows that it's a different experience for everyone.
Yeah. And you said earlier that some, let's say, places are good or better, and some are better than others. Um, I mean, I think we need to talk about this also, where you were, and based on what you did,
Mm-hmm.
because we can tell that you wanted to make it better for everyone around, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But it's not always the case.
Mm-hmm.
What's the worst that can happen in some places?
Well, the worst that can happen. Are you thinking out of the patient's perspective in that case?
Yeah, how they're treated, for example.
Yeah, I I've been very lucky when it's come to palliative and hospice care that we had lots of people working there. So we had lots of time. I would say the worst thing that can happen is if the staff don't have time to talk and help properly. And
Hmm.
something that can also happen is that if a person is hard to help with symptoms, for instance, pain and anxiety, as a nurse or as a doctor, you might try everything you can think of, but sometimes it doesn't become perfect anyway. Yeah. And the worst thing I would say that could happen and that I have seen happen, but not in the hospice where I worked, but in a different type of care situation, is that when you come to a point where you feel like nothing I do helps, whatever I do, nothing helps, then it's easier to step away and look the other way. Yeah. And that means that sometimes people get left behind with their pain and anxiety. Now, it is not common. I want to say that it is not common.
Hmm. So let's go back a bit to like the concept, if you want, of death. Do you think that if people had a more, I don't know if the right word is realistic understanding of death, but they would fear it less?
Yes, definitely. I really do feel that. Um, if nothing else, because if you talk about something, whatever you can talk about, you will fear less, I believe. If you carry things on your own and don't dare to speak to the people you care about things, that is much more anxiety inducing than actually being able to talk about it. And I
Hmm.
also think that it's really important to find information, and there's more and more information to be found out there, about what actually happens both in the body and practically outside. What happens when I come to a hospice, or this particular hospice, if there's a special place you're going, for instance, or if I'm a caregiver or relative, you know what can I say, what shouldn't I say? You can find lots of information, and I think it's really important to be informed, and that's why we need to talk about death and dying. That's what I really believe. Yeah.
I just feel like telling you you should start a TikTok channel talking about those things
Yeah.
because,
Well,
short clips.
I've been thinking about Instagram. I haven't thought TikTok, but it's been a thought. It's been a thought.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
I was sharing about this episode with a friend um, who recently lost her dad, and she had some, questions, and she told me she was looking for information about this before it happened and after. So, you know,
Mhm.
it's just because, yeah, it's people will understand it more the more we talk about it, like we're doing now. I mean, I was even nervous coming into this episode because it's, you know.
Yeah, it's
Um,
hard.
it is hard, and you're also aware, if you know around you, and that's everybody basically, everyone can relate to this to some extent,
Hmm.
so I want to make sure we in this like hour we have people can learn something and help others, uh once things occur.
Hmm.
So let's go through this maybe. So you've been at the bedside of so many people,
Hmm.
11 years plus. That's many people um, going through their final moments,
Yeah.
and meeting their families and so on. So what does just answer this question the way you can, because it's a bit difficult. But what's like a typical, or what does a typical death look like?
Mm.
I know it differs from person to person, but
Yes, but
overall.
if you're thinking about the last few hours,
Hmm.
yeah, um, towards the end, I can do a quick one from when people come to hospice, I would say,
Yeah.
um, and when people come to hospice, they're usually in a state where they can't take care of themselves at home anymore, or they have relatives who can't be home anymore. Sometimes you can have hospice care in the home as well, depends on the system you live in. Um, at that point, you probably don't have much appetite. Maybe when you arrive, you might be in pain, you might have anxiety, and that's when the palliative hospice care hits in, and that's when we start arranging that. And hopefully within the next day or so, with the right painkillers and right anxiety medication, you can adjust that, and with some luck you will have a much better time for a few days or a week or so, from you will feel better for a bit once you get to hospice. Um, but you will start getting weaker with time, and at end you will lose your appetite. Um, you will get your legs will be very weak. You can't get up to the toilet anymore. Um, in those last week, while you're still awake, you will probably be sleeping most of the time, but you will wake up and you will still communicate. You will want to have relatives there if you have any, or friends. You might not want them to stay all the time, or at least not talk all the time, because you will only have a very limited amount of energy. So quite often as a hospice nurse, you have to tell people to be in the room, but don't try to actively communicate all the time. Just, let the person who is dying be the one who takes initiative for communication when they have the energy for it. Um, with time, it's hard to explain actually, but what can also happen is that you'll be more and more tired. You will stop eating. Your kidneys will stop working, so you won't pee anymore. Basically, your kidneys can't deal with fluids anymore, and that means that you won't drink anymore either. And
Yeah.
that can sometimes be very controversial. People can get very upset because they not always, and they shouldn't put IV fluids on a person who's dying, because the thing is that if you give a dying person a fluid IV who doesn't have any kidney function anymore, the body can't get rid of it, and it ends up in the lungs instead, and you slowly drown the patient instead, which is much, much worse. To die not drinking is natural. That's what we do. If you die a natural death somewhere, you will stop drinking and eating, and your body will shut down, and you won't feel thirst towards the end. You won't feel thirst towards the end.
Would the IV be something they do just to make the process faster?
No,
Right. They wouldn't. Okay. So
no,
why do
no.
they do it then?
Sometimes people give in to relatives' demands, I'm going to say, because people are very upset that their relative is dying, and they think that they are thirsting to death, that they are going to be so thirsty, so thirsty. And that if a doctor, who is usually the ones who prescribe the IVs, if they are not strong enough and can explain well enough that the IV will only shorten the life, or it will make the death much worse by filling the lungs with fluids, um, they might just say something like, well, we let's put an IV, but have it very slowly, for instance, drop really, really slowly, because it's hard also for professionals to talk about death, and that's another aspect. And especially when people are scared and upset, and they are grieving, they're losing someone they love. Yeah. But we would never, ever put fluids to shorten the process, because it's a horrible death. It's a horrible death.
I know I'm asking like from a hospital's business perspective, because they want to make money. at the
Ah,
end of the day. That's why I'm asking the question.
yeah, that would be highly unethical. That
Oh
would
yeah,
be,
no,
yeah,
well, that's another topic, the
yes,
world we live in. So
yeah. Well,
yeah,
I can't say I have never ever seen
yeah,
anything like that anymore. I mean, also to be fair, if this doesn't happen, I want to say that. But if you
hmm,
want a patient to die faster, there are more efficient ways than putting a drip. Yeah,
okay.
yeah. So that wouldn't happen.
So when I met you, you know, maybe last year or a couple of years ago, you mentioned one thing like towards the end of life. I don't know when this kicks in exactly, but sometimes people want to caress the hand of the relative
Mhm.
who's living their final moments. Why, you know, what's the outcome of this, and why shouldn't we be doing this?
Well, when you're dying, it seems, I mean, it's very, no one come back. No one came
Hmm.
back and told us how it was.
Yeah.
But from what you can see when you look at a dying person, if you hold your hand and you keep stroking in the same spot over and over and over, and that's very easy to do when you sit for long hours with someone and you hold your hand there and you just pet them, basically. The skin in the dying person is hypersensitive. So if you keep rubbing, that might hurt. It will become very uncomfortable. So that's why we often say you can hold your hand lightly on a hand or arm or leg or shoulder or whatever part of the body you have close to you, but don't rub.
Hmm.
Don't rub, because that becomes very uncomfortable. But it's also the fact that you can see when a person is uncomfortable also during those last hours, um, or up until the very few last hours anyway, because the person will still react to sound and noise and touch, voices. So and if you are in pain, nurses that work in this environment becomes really, really good to understand nonverbal cues of pain and anxiety. And so we have several different things that we look for just to make sure that a person is comfortable.
So maybe this one should be more for the relatives and the people living their last moments. What are some of the most common emotions they go through when they realize that basically death is imminent?
Yeah, with the relevant relatives, yeah. Um, if a person has been taking their time dying, sometimes it can take a long time, several
Yeah,
days or even weeks. At the end, it might be actually be a relief, because in a hospice situation, you have been prepared for a long time, most likely. You have known that this would come. And it is very hard to sit on the side and wait.
yeah,
Yeah. So quite often it's relief, but of course there's also grief, lots of grief. And when it actually happens, the line that I heard more than anything else, the one thing people said was, we knew this would happen, but we weren't prepared anyway, you know, because it's such a monumental thing for a person to be there for an entire life, and then they just don't exist anymore.
hmm,
Yeah. It's a monumental thing. So even if you're prepared and you have all the information, it will be a shock. It will be something that they're going to have to deal with for a long time after. And anger, and
mm,
regret, all the phases about grief, and that's also a reason why it's so important to talk about it, because if you have a good communication with the person dying and between the relatives, you might be able to talk about all those things you wanted to talk about, you know? So
mm,
when the person is gone, you won't sit there with all these things you wish you had said.
yeah. Um, so, what's the best way to help someone beyond like talking about it when we know that this time will come? Sometimes it takes a few days, as you said, sometimes it takes a few weeks.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes um, we're talking about, the process when we know it's going to happen, not like
Mm-hmm.
when it's a shock, like,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But what is it that can be done uh,
For
to
the
help?
relative.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or to prepare people in general. It's not a topic we talk about in schools, for example.
No.
For kids, it's something, they. I'm not saying we should. I don't know. I'm just putting it out there. Let's discuss. But it's something. Why do we know about certain topics? Why about life and so on when we don't know about death? When we know, like, this is a certainty in life. It's gonna happen.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There are
That's the
many
one thing we
uncertain
really
things.
know. Yeah.
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 So what's your ideas maybe on this? Not necessarily things you've seen. It can be both.
Yeah. Um, I I think I come back to talking about it and de-dramatize it. Make sure it's not so dramatic. Make people understand that the dying they see, that's the information they get from media and from films and social media maybe, is not the only truth. Yeah. Um, I actually don't think that we should talk. I mean, I don't think we should teach death and dying as a subject in school. Maybe
Hmm.
not,
Hmm.
for the main reason that I think that it's enough time when you start to grow a bit older. If you have the situation that you have a parent that dies when you're young, yes, absolutely. Then is when all the energy must be put into helping this child who's losing a parent or another relative.
Hmm.
Um, and I think also a good time to do it with young people might be if they have a pet that dies, for instance, and then you did discuss the concept of death and what that means.
Yeah.
When people have pets and children, quite often they will have little funerals, and that is a good way to do it. Actually, you sort of have a little bit of a rehearsal until it's time for real. Not that it's not real when a pet dies; it's very real, but it might be less dramatic than if your mum dies, obviously.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good
Mm-hmm.
way of putting it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I had a few questions here. I can't remember. Um, one parenthesis I want to actually take, and this question came from a friend actually,
Mm-hmm.
who was asking about, when people have, dementia or similar, let's say, diseases.
Mm-hmm.
How, like, is the process the same? Because sometimes it can get to a point where, well, Alzheimer's, right, to a point where people won't, know who you are, even if,
Mm-hmm.
you're the mother or the kid or whatever.
Yeah, yeah. The basic process is the same. If
Hmm.
if we take Alzheimer as an example, um, the Alzheimer doesn't only affect your memory, it also affects other bits of your brain, and it will affect your motor functions, for
Hmm.
instance. So when it comes to the dying process, it looks very similar in almost all situations, which is not, an accident or something catastrophic, but it is shorter or longer, the process. Yeah, you might die from an infectious disease really fast, but you will basically see a very similar. Most of the things that happens is the same as if you are dying from old age, and it takes a year. Yeah.
Hmm.
um, with Alzheimer, you will probably see a faster deterioration, for instance, but in the end, it will look very, very similar.
Okay.
It might be harder for the person to, towards the end, express their needs. But my
Hmm.
experience, I've worked with people with dementia as well, is that they do express their needs. You just have to know what to look for and listen for. Yeah.
Okay. So, thank you for that.
Mm.
Um, the other question, I just want to go back to the title kind of today's
Mm-hmm.
topic, where beyond horror movies and social media and the media in general.
Mm-hmm.
Um, when we look at the news, when there's a natural catastrophe or wars or an accident, usually you hear a lot about, Yeah, you hear percentages, you hear numbers, huge numbers that they manage to calculate it in like an hour. I don't know how.
Mm,
Or you hear collateral damage and
mm,
different kinds of words, let's say. Um, but it kind of it does de-traumatize it, but I think a bit too much,
mm-hmm,
because it's like we forget the individual when one individual can mean a lot to a family. It's like, when it's famous people, it's like a big deal.
mm,
But at the end,
mm.
we're humans, right? So,
Yeah,
so
yeah,
how can we give more meaning
yeah.
to
I th-
to this to the general public in general?
yeah. Um, I absolutely agree that when big catastrophes happen, we get these huge numbers. And I wouldn't say that it de-traumatize it, but we'd get desensitized. Yeah.
Mm,
It is so hard to understand 100,000 dead in a tsunami. I mean, it's a number most of us can never ever count to 100,000. You know,
yeah.
the what made I remember that we had a tsunami in, was it in 2004? I think maybe some 20 years ago now. Anyway, and lots and lots of people died. And in Sweden, people, of course, reacted with horror because quite a lot of Swedish people were affected. I mean, what you really saw was that when you saw pictures and heard about all these people who had died in boats, or all the people who actually lived in the area who died. But what made people extra upset was this little image of a little blonde girl who had drowned, who was laying on a beach. And suddenly, because we were Swedish people, these were Swedes, and this was a Swedish person, then you could understand it. Yeah.
Hmm.
Um, I don't know how we make it more understandable. I'm not sure that is necessarily a good way to do it, to show examples. But I think to share stories, let people share stories about how it was, might help people to understand and get a little bit more empathy about what's happening. Talk to individuals, let individuals tell them what happened to them, because you can understand one person who lost his family, but it's hard to understand 100,000 drowned.
It is for sure. And the word empathy is key, actually, that you
Mhm,
used a few times already. It's actually something we need more everywhere,
mhm,
uh,
mhm,
beyond
mhm.
um, death in general. So I have a weird question. I don't know if this makes sense, but how does a good death look like in your
A good death.
experience?
Oh, yes, I've seen many, many good deaths. I would say that if I would say the best deaths I've heard of, I was not involved in. I almost said I was
Mm,
not, because I can just take my dad's death, where he had wine and shrimps one evening and went to bed, and then he didn't wake up. He had had a
mm,
good conversation with a friend, and then he and then died in the night. So he never knew that he was dying at all. Yeah, that, I mean, that
mm.
happens too, and that is, you can sort of call that a catastrophic death, because that was a catastrophic failure of his aorta in his. Um, but it was a fantastic death. But if you
A
look,
shock to you.
yes, it wasn't fantastic for us, absolutely
Mm,
not. But it was very, very good for him, of course. Um, in hospital, when you have these deaths that I tend to talk about, where you have the time and you go through the phases clearly, um, I mean, any death that doesn't have pain and anxiety, I keep saying that.
mm,
Um, so people sleep into the end and they disappear in, in the sleep in that situation too, most of the time. And they go in unconscious, and they're unconscious, and then they die. And that's usually, and to me, that is a very good death. And a death where you have your loved ones with you, you know,
mm.
so you're not dying alone. And I'm not sure if people, no, I am sure that people know if someone is there or not. But in the end, we die alone, no matter how many people are in the room, because it's the last few steps to death you do yourself. But I really think it is good for people to have someone there to
Yeah.
keep them company while it's happening.
So usually, in general, they kind of aware even if they don't react. That's what you think.
That's what we think. And we know that people who are very far into the dying process, that only have a few moments or minutes left, can still react to sounds. And
Okay.
it is a fact that when someone is dying who has a relative that might be far away and is traveling to come to the bedside, that
Yeah.
you can quite often tell this dying person that your daughter is coming, she's going to be here in a couple of hours. And it is like they actually hear and they just stay on for as long as they can. And quite often in those situations, they are there. The daughter has time to come, and they get a few minutes, but sometimes it's really just about minutes after. So it's like
Yeah.
somehow, and I don't know how that works, but I've seen it several times. So and we know, or we believe, that hearing and touch is the last senses that leaves us when we're dying.
So is that how you create kind of a comforting environment? Uh,
Absolutely. A perfect environment for a dying person, if I orchestrate it, put it
mm,
that way, uh, would probably, if it was a person who loved music, there would be music in the background. Yeah, that they always loved. Um, they would have their loved ones around them in the room, and they would be quietly talking. I mean, imagine when, I don't know if you had that experience, but I know quite a lot of people had it when you were a child and your parents maybe had visitors and you fell asleep in the sofa and you felt really safe and really calm and you heard the adults' voices and you fell asleep. That is how I imagine dying can be when you have your loved ones around you. That you maybe even in your own bed and the door a little open, you hear what's happening outside and you are as comfortable as you ever can be and you're as safe as you ever can be. And that is sort of the last moments you hear the voices and then you're gone. That's how
yeah.
I imagine it. And that's what I truly believe that that is how it can be.
I don't have this direct experience falling asleep when visitors were around because I was too conscious and wanted to hear everything, I think, as a kid. But my family, my close family around falling on the sofa, yeah, it happened many
Mhm,
times. But
mhm, yeah. And
so,
there's a certain feeling of safety and comfort in
mm,
that. Yeah.
yeah,
Yes.
that's a nice way to put it. That's how you believe it is
Mm.
based on,
Yeah.
yeah,
When it's at its very best, that's what I believe. If you can't
yeah,
just
that's
fall down dead, like my dad did, that's great too. Not too early.
yeah. Well, my grandfather had like he was it was in the afternoon. He went for a nap, woke up, coughed a bit, and that was it.
Mm.
It was shocking for everybody.
Mhm,
But at this, with the way you convince yourself is that's the best thing,
mhm.
you know,
Yeah.
for whereas when you have other close people and they go through all the suffering,
Mhm.
it's difficult, even though you want it to end for them, even though it will be hard. And
Yeah.
it's hard for people to grieve actually. So how can you help someone who's grieving?
Yeah. Talk, 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 talk.
Ah,
And no, other way around. Listen, 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 listen,
yeah,
I would say. And be aware and empathetic to the cues of the person, the grieving person, and let them lead the way. And people tend to be afraid to disturb people who are grieving. They don't want to text them and message them after, um, because
yeah,
because they're afraid to disturb them or it's uncomfortable. And I say disturb them until they tell you not to, because people usually don't have enough people to talk about it with. Yeah. And that's part of this fear of death and dying. You don't want to talk to them, because the grieving person, because you don't know what to say, because you don't know what to say, because you don't understand what death and dying is. It's so,
mm.
it has become an unnatural thing when it's the most natural thing there is.
Yeah, it's
Uh,
it's like any topic if you think about every stage of life, there are new things.
Mhm.
Think about, girls, teenagers, period, and then they start
Mhm.
getting. And sometimes you think that people don't want to talk about it, or sometimes they do want to talk about it.
Mhm.
So it's
Mhm.
kind of
Yeah. Yeah. Give the
normalizing it.
offer. Give
Yeah.
give the offer. Say, I'm here to talk, and not only say it once, but actually, and in these social media times, send
Mm,
a meme, send a link with something you liked. It doesn't even have to be about the death and dying and the grieving they're going through. Just let people know that you care and think about them. And out of a professional perspective, what is really important and what happens in most hospices is that after a person has died, um, the hospice try to keep in contact with the relatives for a while after. They will
mm,
call after a couple of weeks, maybe the first week once, and then after 2 weeks, and then after a month and 3 months. And I remember that we kept doing that until the person said that they didn't want us to call anymore, you know,
okay.
just to ask if there were any more. And, people have questions of what happened. And maybe you don't think about those questions moments after the death occurred. Maybe that's
Hmm.
something you think about a week after. Yeah. You keep thinking, you go through the process and what was it that happened there? And, and then it's really important that professionals give these people a chance to ask these questions and get answers.
Have you had people get angry at you
Oh,
because you couldn't let someone stay alive forever?
absolutely. I even had people tell me I killed someone, um, which was
Okay.
not easy. uh, um, People grieve ahead of time, of course, as well. They're going through something really, really hard. And a completely normal reaction to grief is anger. Yeah. And sometimes, as a professional, you will be the person they're angry at. And as a nurse in that situation, you are quite often the symbol for the entire healthcare system and everything that happened up to that point. So if a diagnosis didn't happen fast enough a year earlier, you're the
Mm,
one who's going to have to answer to that in this situation. Yeah. I mean, if they
yep,
feel that something went wrong along the way, that is something that they will bring up with you quite often. And there are no explanations. Sometimes things just went wrong. Yeah.
yep,
Um, and and I think people tend to think that we understand everything. Medical science understand anything, and we understand everything about cancer, for instance, which is the most common thing that people dies of in hospice. Not the only thing, but the most. But the thing is, sometimes medical people, doctors, they don't know either. We don't know why some things happen. Sometimes it just happens. Yeah. Mm. And that is very hard to explain to a very angry person who wants to be in control again, and
yeah,
understand. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I mean, if they're angry, they're not gonna understand it. You have to wait, I guess, to.
Mm. Yeah.
But that's you're talking about typical human behavior,
Mm-hmm.
really.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Yeah.
here. So um, that's fascinating. By the way, I hope this is making sense to people who are listening because I learned so much right now. So
Okay. I'm happy to hear
yeah,
that. Yeah.
yeah, I did. But I yeah, I think I want to ask you. Is there a myth about death that could be correct?
A myth about death. I would say that people die more often at night,
Uh-huh.
because that is not a fact.
Yeah.
At least not in a hospital setting. I even did a little study when I was working in hospice about that, where I went through all the deaths where I was working, where I have been there for the last 5 years to see death, time of death. And
Yeah.
it was nicely evenly spread over the over the 24 hours of the day. It can be that it's more often if you die suddenly at home, because when you're at sleep, it might be that you tend to fail. You don't wake up in time if you feel something is wrong, and then you might die. If
Mm.
you get a heart attack when you're awake in daytime, you might be able to get help. If you get it when you are sleeping and don't wake up from it necessarily, then maybe you will die. But in general, that is a myth. That it's not true. It's also not true that people are more crazy at full moon. No, but that has nothing to do with death.
We had a glitch. Sorry, you said
No,
people
I
are
said they are
crazy.
not crazier by the full moon. Yeah,
Oh, okay, okay, okay.
that is also a myth. Yeah,
Can I fire up a few quick questions because I have many questions, and let's
go ahead.
do it like I'm trying this also since I haven't recorded learning from other podcasters. So, if someone wants to plan ahead for their own, let's call it end of life experience,
Hmm.
what should they think about?
They should write. They should write everything they want down, and include really everything: what they want their funeral to look like, where they want to be, if they want to stay at home as much as they can, if they want to be in hospital, because some people don't want to be at home. Maybe they would rather feel safer in a hospital of some sort.
Mhm.
um, Make sure they're actually talking to their friends and relatives, and tell them their wishes, and also to hear what their relatives want, so they are in agreement. Because sometimes when you're actually dying, relatives might say, no, 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 she would never have wanted this. Yeah, because it's not something that they can understand. So I would say, write it down. Sit down, think about it, go into detail. I planned together with a friend who was dying her entire funeral, music and everything. You know,
Well,
she got it exactly the way she wanted. Yeah.
well, and that's way before you know that you're gonna die. It's just by knowing that you will die at some point.
Well, this my friend, she was dying, so we knew
Okay.
that she was dying. But yeah, I think you could. Um, I think most. I don't know how it in Sweden. We have something called the White Archive. It's
Hmm.
basically a template for this that you can get from most funeral homes, where you can write up everything what you want. Yeah. So, and that you do long before you die.
Okay. So next question is, I don't know if you know Brian Johnson, who's the guy who founded Blueprint. Basically, he's doing experiments on his body,
Mhm.
and that's all he does all day. Basically, he takes over now 50. Oh, it was 100. Now over 50 pills a day. He eats, I think, once a day. He takes all the data he can from his body, and his goal is to live forever somehow. What's your take on people who just want to live for longer than, let's say, the common uh, average humans?
I hope they don't get bored.
Yeah,
I mean, living forever is a very long time, even
yeah,
even much longer than everyone else. I mean, I would think about the people that would go before me. Um,
yeah.
and I also feel like one should live now and not plan for living later. So if I took 50 pills a day and was completely focused on my body and only ate once a day, and that was my complete focus, I personally would feel like that person is not living it in the now. But
Uh,
I mean, if this is his passion, I understand. But no, uh, I don't quite understand that. I don't
yeah,
understand. I believe in quality more than quantity. I really do.
yeah, yeah. As you said, that's his passion. So
Yeah.
he's a techie in that sense.
Mhm.
So okay, next one. Um, if you could give one piece of advice to someone taking care of a dying loved one, what would it be?
It's very hard because it's so many different situations. But if they're still talking and communicating, please listen to what they want.
Mm.
Yeah.
And assuming the caregiver is a relative in this case, what
Hmm.
are signs that a caregiver is emotionally drained, and what should they do about it?
That they can identify themselves, you mean?
Yeah.
Um, if you are a caregiver and start losing patience with the person you're caring, that's a huge sign that you need to have a break. And no caregiver should have to get into that type of situation. There should be enough support for these people who take care of their loved ones at home, for instance, to
Yeah.
make sure that they can get relief. But yes, when they lose patience, get easily angry, stop sleeping, get anxious, that is typical signs.
Mhm. Um, what's the most surprising thing you've seen at a deathbed?
That's my mum's death. And I didn't actually see it myself, but I'm happy to tell you. Uh, my mum was very old. She was 92 years old, and she was still at home. And she had become weaker and weaker the last months or so at this time. And me being far away, I blame that, and also the fact that she's my mum, so I didn't really understand the signs. Um, but the day before she died, I had a talk with her. She was still talking, and my sister and I we were trying to convince her that she had to go into some type of assisted living facility because she was falling over all the time, hurting herself. Yeah. And my mum said, I will not move away from here. This is where I live. This is where I'm going to be. And I told her that she was the most stubborn person I have ever had to deal with. And she said, yes, I am very much yes. And we said, I love you. I'm very happy to say. And then we hung up. And then the next morning, my sister called me and she said, Mum is dead. And I was like, what? Yeah, mum is dead. And I said, well, what happened? And what happened was that she had quite a lot of home care people that came to her. And in the morning, she had been a little bit extra tired. So she got breakfast in bed and she had a little bit of coffee. And she said that she didn't feel like getting up at that point. So the home care person said, oh, well, I'll be back at 10 and then I can help you get up then instead. And when the home care person came back at 10, she found my mum still standing in the kitchen. My mum had gotten up somehow, walked out to the kitchen with her little walker and got herself comfortable leaning against counter because she wanted more coffee, obviously. And while she was trying to get another cup of coffee, either she was having more coffee or she had had coffee. We don't know this. But she was there standing up and she just died, just like that.
Standing up.
So she was standing up. When the home care person came, she was still standing up, leaning on the counter with her coffee cup in her hand. And
Wow.
that is, I tell you, the strangest thing I have ever heard when it comes to someone dying. And that's my own mum.
Wow.
Yeah, and I'm laughing because I find it, that's my mum, the most stubborn person in the world.
Well, I would say that the most creative way of leaving, basically.
Yeah, yeah,
Standing up.
yep,
Wow.
yep. Did not fall down.
Wow. Um, so thank you for sharing the story, by the way.
Oh, you're
That's,
welcome.
yeah. And um, did this or something else, actually your mom's this or someone else's this that you've seen, did any of them uh, change your belief about death over time?
If anything, I was probably more spiritual before I started to work
Hmm.
with dying people than I am now. I don't know if that is life in general or if it was the experience of dying with people. And I really just want to say that there are many different types of spirituality, of course.
Hmm.
And I to be personal, I usually say that I'm agnostic. I really believe that we cannot know and that we will never know.
Yeah.
Um, but I was more likely to believe in something after, before I worked with death and dying than I
Okay.
did after. Yeah.
Okay. So you don't believe in reincarnation?
No, 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 no. I don't think we can know if there's reincarnation.
No, I
I
just
would.
wanted to throw it in just to
No, no, I understand. I mean, it is super interesting. I am the person who love watching ghost shows on TV. Yeah. Oh, I
yeah.
find it super, super exciting. Uh, I don't believe in it. It's I can't explain why. But I mean, I
Mm,
like to be tickled by the idea of the unknown too, of course. It is
mm.
just that this particular thing I have an idea from what I have seen.
And the last one, what is it that made you work into this space, stay for 11 years, and then leave and move on? Because you're also, you're a creative person, right?
Mm.
We have, like, whoever's watching, not listening, we can see a small piece of your work. I'll
Mm.
be putting the links on um,
Okay, thank
in
you.
the description anyway. But
Yeah.
yeah, what is it that got you in this space and made you leave?
Yeah, I became a nurse because it was the easiest thing to do when I started. I went into healthcare because it was easy to get a job in healthcare, and then it turned out I'm good at it. Yeah,
Mm,
and I became a nurse because I love people. I have
mm,
no interest really in illnesses or diseases or medicine like that, but I am very interested in people and how people work. And when I ended up in hospice, it was basically because I had a bit of a burnout myself. And I went to a psychiatrist who said, I think you should work in hospice, she said. And I said, how the hell, excuse me the language, can you say that? Why would I work in hospice? And she said, because you likes to give 100%, she thought about me. And in hospice, you can give 100% for a very short time. The average patient that I met in hospice where I was working was there for 21 days. They came in, we did everything we could to make that time the best they could have, and then they died. And then I went on to the next patient and the next patient. So I got a clear beginning and clear end. And that was the uh, what the psychiatrist told me that she saw. And I mean, that can seem a bit harsh, maybe, but she was right in the way that I like to give everything. Yeah, and I see it as an art as well. When I come away from a deathbed where I know everything became just right, that's art. You have a lot of artists that helping to make that happen. I'm not the only one, but it's a collaboration. Yeah. So that's why. And I got out of it because I got burnt out, or I lost empathy, I would say. It's like you said, I had empathy fatigue and realized
mm,
at one point, because I was sitting talking to some relatives after a person who had died. And I was working night shift, and this was a Sunday to Monday, and we had a few deaths during that weekend before. And I was sitting there and I was saying what I always said to all the relatives. And for a moment, I realized I don't know who I am talking about anymore.
mm.
I don't know which patient's relatives this is. And for them, they had just gone through one of the most monumental, hugest happenings in their life. They lost a loved one, and I didn't even remember who that person was at that point. And that's when I knew, okay, I have to do something else. And that's how I left.
Thank you so much for this. And now I don't only think you should do TikTok, I think you should write a book
Oh, write a
because
book.
there is so much more
Yeah.
and to unpack. But I think that was quite valuable and will help a lot of people
Well, I hope so. And
empathize more.
yeah, empathize more. And you know, um, if you post links, just tell people that they're welcome to contact me if they have questions, because like you say, it's a sensitive subject. So even after a talk like this, people might have questions and need to have some sort of answers or some feedback.
Yeah,
And I'm very happy if people write me and contact
yeah.
me, and I'm happy to answer the best I can.
So is LinkedIn the best place? Like,
LinkedIn, I should be better. I'm not very good at it, but I'll get better. I do see the messages, so absolutely.
ah,
If you send a message, I'll see them.
thank you so much. If there's anything you would like to add that we didn't touch on, feel free to do so. Um,
Well, I would say maybe what we didn't talk about is maybe how important it is out of a societal perspective to talk about death as well, because economically, you know, cancer treatments, for instance, are incredibly expensive, and if we don't talk about death, we tend to treat longer than we have to, for the reason that we treat after we, as medical professions, know this is not going to cure, but we sort of feel like we're taking away hope from the patient by saying this is not going to work. So someone might say, okay, we do another round of chemo, or we do another round of chemo. And that adds suffering to the patients, because chemo is not easy to go through, especially not the amounts you get when it's still trying to cure a cancer. It also takes away, it can take away quality of life, for the reason that you might not be lengthening the life with this treatment. You might actually be shortening it. And the time you have left as a palliative patient might be much better if you don't have to go through these really, really harsh treatments. Yeah. And also it costs society a lot of money. Yeah.
mm,
So that is another reason we need to have the discussion. And also out of an environmental perspective, we look at how our death culture, how we take care of our dead after. We tend to bury people in the ground, is the old tradition. We don't have space in urban areas for that anymore, maybe.
mm-hmm,
Or we cremate people, and cremation is very, very bad for the environment. So much carbon released. And there are other ways to take care of bodies that we should be discussing, I think. But it's so taboo. We have been burning people for tens of thousands of years as human beings, so we can accept cremation. And we have put people in the holes for just as long, so we can accept having a full body funeral. But the absolutely most environmentally friendly version that's out there right now is something called aquamation, which is basically that we take the body, put it in a bath with a very alkali lotion, and the body tissues melt away, dissolves, and all you have in the end is the skeleton. And what you're left with after that, the tissues are gone, is water. And it can be,
mm,
sometimes it's water that has quite a lot of fertilizer. It can be used as fertilizer. You know, we do this with animals quite often, but we don't do this with people yet. And it is basically water. You can, yeah, I don't suggest we should, but you can just put them down the drain, you know. But what you're left with is the bones, and the bones you treat the same way as you do with a cremated body. And so you
mm-hmm,
still have bones or powdered bone to put have a funeral with. Yeah.
yeah,
And this is uh, cremation is 7 times more carbon
mm,
um, emission than aquamation, for instance. But when we say that we want to put people in a bath with alkali solutions and melt them, people think serial killers, you know,
yeah.
live.
The
Yeah,
process is
yeah, yeah,
is difficult to digest, actually,
yeah. It
when
is.
you think about it. But
Yeah, but so is burning if you really think
yeah,
about it.
again, you know, you would have professionals who take care of all this, but I mean, people who would want to do this kind of work.
Yeah.
But it's as you said, talking about death is already taboo. How
Mm-hmm.
about talking about
Mm-hmm.
what to do with the body
Mm-hmm.
is another topic, actually.
Yeah, it is.
But I'm gonna look into aquamation. Aquamation, you said, because
Aquamation, yeah. Yeah.
it's I would opt for this one for myself.
Yeah. It's not legal for humans in many places yet.
Just yet, yeah,
I do believe it will happen. Yeah.
yeah. Oh, thank you for just dangling the carrot on this one, and let's see what the reactions are.
Yes.
Whether it's you know, commenting or listening, because this show is obviously on audio as well, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, but and Substack. But um, it's what I'm more interested is what people will do, take away from this, and how can this help them make better decisions.
Yeah, and I
actually.
hope some, some thoughts. People have some
Yeah.
thoughts that you start thinking.
Yeah.
And
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. It was
And
much
I'll
fun.
put all the links. Yeah.
Okay.
Cheers, everyone. Thank you so much. We went a bit over time.